power. Solar juice has got the power. It's solar power. It's solar power. Solar juice has got the power.
Who's got the power? On solar power. The power with solar juice. Solar juice.
Thanks for coming along. My name's Nigel Morris. I know a lot of you, but I don't know all of you, so I look forward to catching up with you afterwards and getting to know you a little bit better. Before we dive in, we'll just run through a couple of things. The good thing about these events, I remember I've been selling solar for 20 years, and I remember many years ago I went along to one of the first solar training events that I'd ever been to, and a few weeks after that event I was standing in a showroom talking to a customer and trying to sell them some solar gear, and the thing that really struck me was when you know a product well, you find yourself able to sell it a lot better. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 suppliers who we're going to work our way through today, so I'll invite each of the suppliers up in a bit and we'll go through some of the questions that we've got in line for them. Of course, please feel free to ask your own questions as well. I think we've done the logistics. I think the key thing now is for you to hear a little bit from Andrew. For those of you who haven't met Andrew Burgess, Chief Head Honcho at Solar Juice. I've known Andrew for a long time. In fact, he was jammed in a corner in a little factory in Villawood when I first met him. And it's been my pleasure to watch Andrew, you know, over the years, form what is now one of the biggest solar companies in Australia. In fact, the largest, according to my numbers, a year or so ago. So fantastic to watch a young man grow such a huge and successful business. So Andrew, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and about Solar Juice?
Yeah, thanks Nigel, and yeah, thanks for everyone for attending the event today, which is a new format and a new agenda which we wanted to trial, and recognition to all the suppliers in particular who have taken the effort to come out and spend time with us all today. So we hope that it'll be a really informative time that we can get to share information. Also, just 2 apologies which were last minute. Unfortunately, Zygmunt from ABB was struck down with some sort of illness, so unfortunately he's unable to make it today. And likewise with JA Solar, Samuel Blackadder unfortunately has got some personal issues with a family member. Just a brief background to Solar Juice. So Solar Juice was established in 2009. Having worked for 2 manufacturers prior to that, we identified an opportunity that was about to emerge in New South Wales with a 60-cent gross feed-in tariff, and therefore, having come from a manufacturing background, having understood a little bit about channel and the distribution market, we saw an opportunity where the market was likely to see some fairly strong growth, which it obviously did. In terms of starting a new business, there couldn't have been a softer entry into a market if you had have dreamt of one. So demand was very strong throughout 2010. We expanded quite quickly to other states, and over the last 5 years, we're coming up to a 5-year anniversary. At the end of November, we've supplied just over 2,000 business customers around the country.
Yep.
Have supplied over 712,000 panels into the country, which equates to about 1,200 40-foot containers of panels, and around 76,000 inverters have been supplied into the Australian market. So the focus has been purely around expanding that B2B network. We don't see ourselves as a manufacturer. We see ourselves sitting in between the manufacturer and the retailer and being able to provide the logistical solution. So having products at the right place at the right time at the right price, and of course partnering with manufacturers and principals that have high quality products and that are going to be around to support the industry moving forward. So despite the current uncertainty around the policy side of things, we're still extremely optimistic about the future of solar in Australia, and extremely optimistic about our position as a wholesale distribution business.
Awesome. Andrew, I mean, I wandered out into the workshop before to see if I could flog any panels. The security was good, unfortunately, but I mean, I remember years ago we used to have a big warehouse when you and I were working together, and I walked out into that warehouse and I just can't believe the stuff that's in there. I mean, what's the value of the stock that you're carrying out there now?
So I mean, it varies from month to month, depending on obviously changes in the market. We run the main operation out of the Sydney warehouse, but we also have facilities in 3PL warehouses around the country. So we have Townsville, Brisbane, Fremantle and Adelaide.
Yeah, right.
In terms of stock, we carry anywhere between 8 to 15 megawatts of panels at any one time.
Wow.
And between 10 to 25 megawatts of inverters at any one time.
Wow.
So,
and you've got a bunch of staff too. Your business has been growing over the years. In fact, who's from Solar Juice here? Throw your hand up. There's 1, 2. How many staff have you got?
At the moment, we employ three sales guys. So Harry, Charlie, Raju, Amendis and Cheryl, wherever she is, somewhere walking around upstairs, doing some work, getting some last minute deals done. At the moment, around just over 20 staff altogether.
Yep.
We've recently appointed a Asian sales manager to develop the market throughout, particularly the Pacific, where we see some good opportunities emerging out of places like PNG, Fiji, Cook Islands, and potentially into Southeast Asia, markets in the Philippines, Thailand, and areas like that.
So onward and upward for Solar Juice.
That's right.
That's great. So we were chatting earlier on, and you were sort of saying to me that there's, when you're talking to your customers, there's always 3 questions that come up, and I wanted to touch on those with you and get your view on those. Obviously, the big one is the RET. Last week we had a series of very successful rallies around the country, and there's been a huge amount of effort going on from everyone. I know you guys have been really active in it, so thank you for your support for the industry, because I know, for those of you who don't know, Andrew and Rami have contacted me for months and months and months and been doing lots of stuff behind the scenes, spending their own money to try and help defend the RET. What's your view on the current situation, mate? What do you see, and what do you think are the big issues around the RET?
Yeah, so for us, I mean, our business has primarily been linked to the SRES component of the RET, which is the small scale certificates. And I think that the effort that has gone into lobbying and campaigning over the last couple of months since prior to the release of the Warburton Review, the effort that was going on prior to that, I think, has demonstrated that there's a whole heap of bodies out there, whether it be the Clean Energy Council, whether it be the Australian Solar Council, whether it be groups like Solar Citizens and so on, that are doing some great work trying to get the message across in terms of ensuring that Australia is committed to renewables moving forward. In relation to the situation at the moment, I know there's a number of guys in the room here who are involved in various different activities. Yesterday there was some meetings in the city with a number of us talking about some possible avenues to proceed in relation to lobbying with key ministers. So I think that the one thing that is apparent is that in relation to the SRES, that politicians do recognise that it's widely supported in the electorate, which is very important, that it does employ significant numbers of people, not just in cities but in rural and regional areas, so I think that's a huge positive. And I think that in terms of where Australia sits relative to a lot of other countries that are moving more progressively towards renewables, I think that there's probably a lot of pressure that can be applied in relation to ensuring that government realises that the Australian people actually want to see more being done than less being done. So I think the latest information is that the report has been released. That's been considered by the government at the moment, and the expectation is that they will come out with their position within the next 1 or 2 weeks on where they stand with that and what changes, if any, that they're likely to push through. I think it's clear that they've indicated that there will be some changes that are pushed through. But for us, and I guess for everyone in the room here, the important thing is not to become complacent about it and to keep the pressure up, to keep supporting a lot of the groups, supporting a lot of the rallies, supporting the efforts that are going on from so many different people.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. For what it's worth, I don't know how many of you, if any of you managed, I know a few of you got to Manly, but I was involved in one of the rallies in Manly, and there was about 150, maybe 200 people who came to that rally, and you kind of ask yourself sometimes, you know, is this worth the effort, and does 150 or 200 people make a difference when they go and make a bit of a commotion and yell and scream out in front?
The police there multiply.
They do. You're exactly right. Every person is equivalent to about 20 in their eyes. But the proof of the pudding and the success of those rallies was in the story in the paper for me yesterday, where one of the local councillors said, in 25 years of serving on local government in Manly, she has never ever seen a rally with that many people out in front of the Prime Minister's electoral office. Never.
And you never thought you'd be in politics, did you?
No, that's right. So you know, the real value in that is that there was a huge message that was sent. It's not something that happens a lot, and so it really does have a huge impact. So, you know, the other thing that's been great is I know a lot of people have been visiting their local members and making phone calls and doing various other things. So I can't stress enough how crucial it is. I put in a phone call to Canberra yesterday. I was chatting with a couple of guys down there to get a quick update for you as well. And what we're hearing is that the core group of ministers in government started the debate and talking about the Warburton Review last week, and that they're continuing those discussions this week, and they'll bring in the backbenchers and the rest of caucus this week and probably give them their opinion on what they might move forward with. That's particularly at the moment, they're really just discussing the report. They're not really probably discussing what the policy changes will be, if any. But the feeling is that because there's a long weekend this coming weekend, I'm told, and so Friday afternoon at about 4 p.m. we expect a press release, because that's the perfect time from a political standpoint, is put it out before a long weekend and the hype all dies down by Tuesday. So we think it's pretty likely that they might make an announcement about what their view on the Warburton report is this week, and then we'll continue the negotiations with the opposition on policy.
Yes, I know Douglas, Daniel, a couple of others who were meeting with some of the lobbying groups that we're dealing with, were saying that it's likely that the minister needs to take a position to the cabinet sometime next week. Yep. So I think it's clear they have to come out with some sort of position on the report and what changes are going to be made, if any.
Yep. So. Yep. And it's an interesting one. I remember doing some modelling on this when some of the changes were talked about just around the time of the election, and one of the arguments that the government's been using around the SRES is that, well, the price of solar has fallen so much that, you know, it doesn't actually need the support anymore, which we know is a crock. But anyway, that was one of the stories that was being rolled out, and I very quickly sent some data down that showed how actually the cost of PV bottomed some time ago and has actually been working its way back up. And in the last week or two, we've seen foreign exchange shift by 7-8%. So, you know, interestingly, we've now got this position where the cost of solar is coming up, which is actually helping our case for arguing for the SRES. And I know FX must be a huge impact on a business like yours with all that stuff out there. Where are you guys seeing, is there a tipping point at which FX sort of, to me it was always that magic number was around 3, 4, 5% you might be able to absorb. Once you get past that, you're talking some pain that you've got to pass on, right?
So, I mean, in terms of our strategy, I mean, the bulk of 90+% of the products that we sell are either denominated in either US dollars or in Europe. What happens with FX, it seems to have a mind of its own sometimes and doesn't follow fundamentals. But regardless, the drop over particularly the last 2 weeks, from 93.5, 94 cents down to, it's struggling to hold 87 overnight into the 86s. We unfortunately,
you've been making some decisions.
We unfortunately have difficulty holding on to a shift of that without making adjustments. So I think everybody's in the same boat.
Yep.
Everybody's exposed to that to a degree, I guess, depending on your foreign exchange policy or how you manage your currency. But
Yep.
I think we'll see prices start to increase in October. That's certainly, well, very unfortunately, but what we'll be having to push through.
Yeah. I'll come back to you on that, because it'd be good to, we must let the government know around the policy front on that as well. So that also kind of leads into this third issue, and I write a lot about on my blog about pricing and about where the market's at, and of course we've seen the prices come down, and sometimes I wrote a story a while ago about pricing that was 80 cents a watt installed, and you kind of look at all of this and you look at the market and you go, what's going on out there with price? And with such big coverage in the market, you must see this price erosion issue going on all the time out there, right? What's your view on that?
Right, and I guess that's both in the commercial and residential space, where I know several conversations I've had with people in the room here about, Andrew, how's it possible that they've gone in at that pricing on a 5 kilowatt system, or how's that possible on a 100 kilowatt system to meet that? You just can't make money on those sorts of numbers, and I think that that's probably the case. That's probably the case in a lot of those circumstances where there is no money to be made. So I think that there's an element of maybe the industry maturing, people having to learn from their mistakes. Often those mistakes mean that they're no longer in business,
right?
Which has been a real challenge for the industry over the last couple of years. I think your latest, or your report earlier this year, indicated something like 200 businesses. Yeah,
at least 200 last year.
Subject to some sort of involvement by a government agency.
Yep.
And a large number of those, unfortunately, have moved into bankruptcy. So I think that as part of the industry maturing, it's a case of people having to maybe go through some of those periods where they haven't costed in a commercial job properly, they haven't sized cable correctly, they haven't understood the issues around OH&S or having access to the roof, and all of these hidden costs that are built into it sometimes mean that the project is profitable or not. And I think for those guys that take all that into account, they're well placed for moving forward in relation to the pricing that we see from more on the retail side or the smaller end in terms of sub 5 kilowatt systems. I think that one of the good questions for some of the manufacturers later today, particularly the panel guys, will be in relation to B grade product, C grade product, or tier 2 or tier 3 product coming in, and potentially even parallel imported product, which we've seen continue as people do strive to drive that dollar as low as possible. I bumped into a guy in New Zealand, of all places, recently, who was from Australia, who was a sales guy for one of the very substantial retailers in the marketplace, and we were talking about price erosion as well. And he actually said to me, do you think there's a place? Do you think companies who sell at a good price and make a good margin and sell quality products, do you actually think those companies can survive in the face of this competition, in this price erosion market? And I said, yeah, I do. There's plenty of evidence of those companies surviving in the long term. And I said, I think it's a long-term play. There's companies who do lower volumes, but they survive 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years in some cases. And then around the edges, there's all these other guys who, in some cases, will sell at cost or below cost because they're just chasing volume. And in an overheated market, when there's lots of sales falling from the sky and your overheads are low, you can maybe make that work. But as soon as things get tough, it's a different case. And he explained to me that the company he was working for sold everything at a loss. And I said, well, why on earth would you do that? And he said that he spoke to his boss about it, and they were doing some pretty decent volume, and he said, we're selling at a loss. And he said, yeah, I know that. And he said, well, why are we doing this? Why are we bothering? And he said, because I've got more money behind me, so I can afford to carry the loss for longer than any of my competitors, and I'm just going to be around longer, and then I'll win. Now, of course, wealthy people don't lose money for a long time successfully, right? So so he'd seen it, and he'd actually seen people pouring vast amounts of money into propping up unprofitable businesses.
But that can only last for so long, and of course, you know, the lower the price goes, the less revenue you're making for the same amount of work anyway. So it's a challenge. So I mean, this is really the difference between a short-term play and a long-term play, right? And I mean, having watched you over a long time, you've been in the industry a long time. Presumably, you've got a long-term view on this business as well, right?
Yeah, I think in terms of where pricing is moving to, I think in terms of panel pricing, it's probably levelled out at the moment.
Yep.
There's probably some modest reductions over the coming years.
Yep.
In terms of inverters, there's probably a bit more room to move there.
Yep.
But I think that generally, I mean...
So it's SMA's fault. They're here today, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think long term, there's...
You'll get your chance.
Long term, there's no doubt about it whatsoever that we see that PV in particular, as part of the renewables mix, will be a significant part of...
Oi. Oi.
Part of...
There we go. Oh, we're still on? Okay, yeah, okay.
Inferior quality breakers.
I've got a good question for you.
Yeah, go.
So, let's say 200 something companies, I saw a list about how many companies went bankrupt last year.
Yep.
You're in a position where you're supplying a lot of these companies. You have to plan for contingencies and insurance. I am therefore paying a premium, or I'm paying to help cover that insurance. Is it single digit percentages are we talking to that I'm paying extra to cover these companies going bankrupt? Because obviously we've got to cover that somehow.
That's a great question.
Yeah, and it's one that that we're sometimes torn with when we're approached by certain customers out there, that we
have to look at your risk differently depending on who you're dealing with, right?
Right. I mean, more so in terms of the way we cover risk, we have an insurance policy in place, which we've had in place for the last 4 years now. The premium on that insurance policy has tripled year on year, to the point where now we're paying close to 1%. And most new policies, most of the insurance companies will just walk away from it. They're not interested in the sector anymore. So solar's considered just too high a risk. They've just been burnt.
Is that right?
Too
Wow.
much, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we tried renewing our policy 3 months ago. We'd been with QBE for 3 years, and it was only that we'd already been with them and they'd already suffered such significant losses that they continued to deal with us and wrote a new policy. Otherwise, they wanted to walk away from it.
Wow.
So it's a risk that absolutely we do pass on, and the costs have to be absorbed somewhere. The challenge for us is that we either walk away from that sort of policy and we struggle to sleep at night, or we have to have it in place. So
we're paying about 1 to 2 cents of what across the board for dodgy companies.
For that risk.
1%, yeah, you're
For
right.
the risk,
across,
yeah.
across all the products, right.
And interestingly, I mean, I applied for a motor vehicle dealer's license recently for electric motorcycles. It's another story, which I'll get it in here somewhere. But interestingly, if you want to apply for a motor vehicle dealer's license, you have a mandatory contribution that you need to make each year, kind of like the home warranty fund, but to protect consumers in case a motor vehicle dealer goes under. So you're going to end up paying it one way or the other. In case of motor vehicle dealer's license, through the licensing. In case of our industry, it tends to be through little premiums. But yeah, okay. Andrew, that's awesome. Thanks for coming up and telling us your story. And I'll let you go and hide in the back of the room now, and we'll keep rolling. But thank Andrew, everyone.